Hey everybody, it's Boo Ray Perry from Tampa, Florida, and today we are going to talk about the definitions you should know to be a photographer. So let's back this up just a little bit. Not too long ago I made a video where I talked about the levels of photography and how, we don't really have like a set level where we can say that person is level 3 and that person is level 5. We don't really have like a standard. It was an interesting discussion, and you can go check out the video. I'll put a link right up here for you. So I got to thinking about it, and I was like, it's really hard to do the higher levels of photography, but it shouldn't be so hard to do the basic levels of photography. So I sat down and I said, if I was talking to you and you said, I'm a photographer, what's the very base thing that I would expect you to know? Right? Like I would expect to be able to use these terms in a conversation with you and have you know what they are. So it ended up being 20 terms, and I put them into an ebook. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read these terms off and show them to you here in this video, but I also have them in an ebook, and the ebook is free. So if you go down into the description, you will find a link to my website, and there you can get the free ebook with the 20 descriptions. You can put them in your phone, and you'll always have them there and something that you can refer back to. I highly encourage you to do this. Now, if you would like to buy me a cup of coffee because I put this ebook together, then you will have that opportunity when you get the ebook for free. You can also throw me a little tip, and that would be great, but certainly it's not mandatory. What I want you to do is to look at these descriptions and see, do you know them all? And if you don't know them all, there are video links to my channel that describe just about every one of these descriptions. So if you know all these descriptions, and many of you watching the channel will know all of this stuff, but if you know all of these descriptions, then I would consider you to be level 2. Now, level 1 is when you first get started in photography and you're trying to learn all of this stuff you have to learn. Level 2 is when you've got all this basic stuff down and you are ready to start really stepping up to the next level. Now, when you reach level 2, then it's time to talk about natural light. It's talk about recognizing light, finding light, how to put a person in the light, how to expose for it, how to set up your camera. Now we start talking about theory. We start talking about composition and all that kind of side of stuff. And if you are ready for that, then you're ready for the ebook that I actually charge money for. And that is Natural Light Photography. How to find the light, how to recognize the light, how to work with the light. That's also available on my website, and there is a code available in the description right now. I don't know if it will be there forever. This is an introductory offer. So go down in the description and use that code for 50% off on that ebook. But by all means, go download the free ebook for these descriptions so that you've got them there in your phone. All right. Let me get a sip of water and we'll go. Somebody asked me recently in one of the videos I made, they said, how come you're always drinking water in your videos? Can't you drink water before you make the video? And I actually have a very good reason, medicinally, why I drink water in my videos. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to see if you can figure it out. But there's a reason why I'm always drinking water in my videos, and it's not so that I can show off my cool mug. That's not the reason. All right, I've got them up in front of me. Let's get started. Let's talk about the 20 definitions that you should know if you want to be a photographer. Starting off right off the bat, light meter. You have to know what your light meter is, a scale inside the viewfinder or on the LCD that shows you what the camera believes to be the proper exposure. 0 or center is considered correct exposure as far as the camera is concerned, not necessarily as far as you're concerned. Right? That's what a light meter does. Metering modes. The camera has several different modes for determining the correct exposure. They have names like spot, center weighted, average, evaluative, matrix, and each mode works differently than the others, and they can result in different values on the light meter. So you need to know what those modes are. You need to understand them. Stop. This is a word that a lot of people don't pick up until they've been doing this for too long. An increase of the light by 100% or a decrease in the light by 50% is a stop. So if someone says it's a stop brighter, then it is twice as bright. And if they say it's a stop darker, then it is half as bright as it was before. Then we get to the exposure triangle and the effects that the exposure triangle have. Now, funnily enough, I don't have exposure triangle listed as one of the terms that you need to know. Because I figure if you know what is in the exposure triangle, that's good enough. I didn't want this thing to be too long. So first up, ISO. It sets the sensitivity of your camera sensor. And low numbers are less sensitive, and a bright day can be, say, ISO 100. But a dark room might be ISO 3200. The side effect of ISO is noise. And if you have a high ISO set on your camera, you will have more noise or grain in your images. Then there's aperture, which is sometimes called AP or f-stop, and it sets the size of the opening in your lens that lets in the light. The lower the number, the wider the opening. So f1.4 is a big opening and f22 is a small opening. And then depth of field is the side effect that comes from aperture. The wider your aperture is, the more light you let in, the shorter or shallow the field of focus is going to be. Then there's bokeh, pronounced bokeh, emphasis on both syllables, and it's used to describe the blurriness of the out of focus part of your image. And this is one of those things where I was like, you know, do you really have to know? Yeah, you kind of do, because it's used so much. People talk about the bokeh all the time. And if you don't understand what bokeh is, then you're going to be a little bit behind. So bokeh, the blurry part of your image, bokeh describes what that blurry is. So say it has a really nice bokeh, or it has a really bad bokeh. Bokeh, 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 bokeh. It's pronounced bokeh. Not bouquet and not bokeh, but bokeh. That's the way it's pronounced. Bokeh, not bokeh. All right. That was bound to happen at some point. It's 20 definitions. All right, next up, shutter speed, the third part of the exposure triangle. It sets the length of time that the aperture is open. And it's usually defined as a fraction of a second. If it's not defined as a fraction of a second, if you have a shutter speed that's 1 second or longer, you've got to have it on a tripod. That's a very long. You can't hand hold a camera at a shutter speed of 1 second or longer. So 160 is actually longer than 1/500, and that can be confusing because the smaller number, 160, it's not really a smaller number because it's a fraction. So 160 is a longer exposure than 1/500th because it's 1/60th of a second versus 1/500th of a second. Motion blur. If a moving subject requires a fast shutter speed so that it can freeze the subject and prevent them from blurring, and also hand movement can shake your camera and blur a scene if the shutter speed is not high enough to prevent it, which is why you can't hand hold a camera with a 1 second shutter speed. Next up is white balance, and this sets how the camera displays color based on the color temperature of the light in the scene, and that's a whole other science that you're going to get into if you're learning photography, and that's the color science of white balance and color temperature. But as far as white balance is concerned, to really get ready to move to level 2, you just need to understand that your white balance in your camera sets what your camera perceives the color of the light to be so that it can reproduce that in the image accurately. Next up is the PASM dial. The PASM dial is on your camera and it sets the various auto settings in the camera, unless of course you use a Fuji camera like the X-T5 or the X-T4. They don't have PASM dials because they have dials for every individual thing on top of the camera, but most other cameras have a PASM dial. And the PASM stands for P, which is program mode, where the camera sets everything up for you. You can make changes, but the camera decides how those changes are applied. Then there's aperture priority. The user, that's you, sets the aperture, and the camera sets the shutter speed and the ISO. There's shutter priority. The user sets the shutter speed, and the camera sets the aperture and the ISO. And then there's manual. In manual mode, you set everything. You're rocking it. You're fully in charge. Next up is exposure compensation, sometimes called EC. And exposure compensation is a way to change the exposure, and it varies based on the auto setting of the camera, based on what you've done with the PASM dial. For example, if you are in aperture mode, A mode, if you adjust the exposure compensation dial, it will adjust the ISO and the shutter speed, but it won't adjust the aperture because you're in aperture mode and you adjust that. If you're in shutter speed mode and you turn the exposure compensation dial, it will adjust the aperture and the ISO, but it won't adjust the shutter speed because you are in shutter speed priority mode and you adjust that. So basically, if you have the camera in a mode where you control something, then exposure compensation will control the rest of it for you. Next up is sensor size. Cameras' sensors come in different sizes. There's medium format, full frame, APS-C, which is sometimes called a crop sensor, micro four thirds, and then whatever it is they call the sensor size that's in your actual camera. And you should know, or rather in your actual phone, that's a teeny tiny one. And you should know what the sensor size is of your camera. You're going to have to look that up because it will affect how your depth of field works with that camera. Focal length. Focal length is a number that defines the field of view of the camera. So a wide field of view, a camera that sees a lot, a wide angle lens has a small number. Yeah, that's what's annoying about these numbers sometimes. So like something that's a 16 millimeter or a 24 millimeter lens is a really wide field of view. But if it's a zoom lens, it zooms in really close, that has a big number like 200 millimeters or 300 millimeters. A prime lens. A prime lens is a lens with a fixed focal length. So a 200 millimeter lens is a fixed prime lens. A zoom lens is a lens that has a variable focal length. So if you have a 24 to 70 millimeter lens, meaning that it can be 24 or 70 or anywhere in between, that is a zoom lens. And that's it. That wasn't so bad, right? 20 definitions. And I think if you know those 20 definitions, that you are ready for the next step. If you don't, then you might have some trouble, because there's going to be times when you're watching videos from me or getting my ebooks or my guides or watching stuff online where the photographer who's teaching you might say something or mention something, and just not understanding, for example, aperture versus shutter speed or something along those lines will throw you off. And now you're like, what? I don't quite get that. And now you're off. I don't, and you've lost everything. So you don't want that to happen. So I think if you know these 20 definitions, at least for me, that you're in pretty good shape in terms of anything that I talk about on my channel or that I teach in my books, that you're there. You're level 2. You are not a beginning photographer. You are a photographer. You're a person who understands photography. Once again, don't forget, down in the description, go to the website, get the free ebook that has all of these descriptions and the links to all the videos on my channel that describe these different descriptions. Define these different descriptions. You don't describe a description. A description is a description. So define these different descriptions. Also, do not forget, please follow me on Instagram at BooRayPerry and follow me on Threads. Be sure and join my group on Facebook called Pro Photo Talk with Boo Ray Perry, and throw me a like, throw me a subscribe, because it helps. Be sure and click the notification button so that you'll get notifications when I have new videos that come out, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.